Hi everybody! For today, we have somebody very special for our Asian in Focus, Mr. John Von Segern. I hope I did not mispronounce it. He is a bassist by heart, but actually he has done so much. He was on tour with one of the biggest Asian pop stars in the world to this day, Jackie Chung. I told him that one of the most interesting thing about his career is the fact that he's actually built a very solid career in Asia. So we are going to talk to him about it. He's also a music producer. He's done some work with some Western pop stars like Nelly Fado. He has his own album as well. So I know that you have sent me hundreds of questions about the process of music productions, legalities. I'm not sure if it's going to touch on that, but we will try to ask about as many of the questions as you sent. Hi, John. Thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this interview.
Hi, thanks for having me. This is going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm sure. We had some conversation off the screen. It's so interesting. Okay, but let's do the beginning first. So when did you start discovering your passion for music, and when was the turning point when you said, okay, I can make a career out of this?
Okay, well, when I was in high school, I liked to try a lot of different activities, but music seemed to be the most fun, and I played in music in school as well as having my own bands. I had a punk rock band back then. And then when I went to college, I was initially telling myself, well, you should major in something useful.
Right.
You know, don't major in music because, you know, what are you going to do with a music degree? But after a couple of years, I realized I just wasn't interested enough in anything else to really apply myself to studying it. And I went to a pretty hard college, Carleton College in Minnesota, so I didn't think I could just fake my way through it. So I decided to study music. However, the music degree I have there is in classical history and theory, what you would get at a liberal arts college. I also studied classical bass performance, and I played jazz at college, so I did get some performance there. But anyway, then after I finished college, I got a scholarship to go to New York City. Okay. And I went to another year of jazz school there on a scholarship. So
in college, was it more theoretical, or you were actually, okay. Did it help at all?
Somewhat, not that much, to be honest. Well, I studied a lot of things. It was very interesting, and I'm very glad I know about the history of music and where it all came from. But the kind of music I ended up playing and the things I've ended up doing haven't ended up using a lot of that background that much.
So when was your first professional break?
My first professional break, I don't know if there's ever a break. It all just kind of adds up little by little. So I went to jazz school in New York City, and when I was that was really fun. But when I was in New York City, I realized it's the most competitive city in the world for music. Yeah. So
for a lot of things,
and for a lot of other things as well. But I realized if you're trying to start your career, it's going to be really hard to do it in New York City because you won't be able to get any professional gigs. Right. You know, you'll have to have some other job, and you won't have as much time to work on music, and that might take a long time, actually. So I started thinking, you know, I really need to start my career somewhere else. And there's another aspect of this whole story that I had a girlfriend then. Okay. And my girlfriend was a Japanese, well, she wasn't actually a Japanese major in college, but she studied Japanese in college, and she was very, very good at languages. Okay. She was Puerto Rican, actually. But she learned Japanese very well, and she ended up going, while I was in New York, she ended up going to Japan and teaching English in Japan. Okay. And we kept in touch, and then I ended up deciding, at that time, Japan was having boom times, you know, and also we all knew music is really popular in Japan, and especially jazz is really popular in Japan. So over that year, my girlfriend and I decided what we should do is move to Tokyo together.
So then from Japan, you were on tour with Jackie Chen
Yes.
for from 1995, and you did it in 1999.
Yes.
And you said this is one of the biggest, at least at that time, one of the biggest, probably still, at least.
I would imagine.
Yeah, Asian pop artist with over 100 stops. So how did you end up meeting him, and how did he end up asking you to go on tour with him?
Good story. Yeah, good question. So when I started my career over there, which would have been about 91.
Okay.
I was playing jazz. What I wanted to do was play jazz. And so I pursued that goal in Japan. In order to do that, I had to learn to speak Japanese, which was important. And I also had to, get out and meet people and network. And so I did that, and I ended up getting a lot of gigs in Japan in the jazz scene. I was there for about 4 years, and by the last year, I remember I was playing jazz like 4 or 5 nights a week. Mm-hmm. And at that point, I loved it, but it was, you get to a certain point doing something like that, and it's like, well, I'm only making $100 a night. I can't really play any more nights. Right. I guess this is as far as I can go with this.
Right.
So then I realized, it'd be nice to have at least some gigs that paid more, that would be a more sustainable career. At that point I couldn't. There are people still now that go down that route, that they're just going to play jazz gigs every single day for the rest of their lives, but that didn't seem to be a fruitful path to me. So I started doing different kinds of gigs, and then in, I guess, 95, there was an American guitarist friend of mine over there who called me one day, and he said, there's this group from Hong Kong. They're trying to find a guitar player and a bass player to go on this tour. And it's a really big deal. It's a really big tour. And at first I didn't even believe him, because he wasn't really doing things like that. I knew he had, but I wasn't sure if I believed him. And we didn't know anything about the Chinese music scene then. So this is actually quite funny. So, but I didn't want to turn it down,
Right,
I didn't know what it was. So I said, yeah, have him call me. So this band leader called me from Hong Kong, and he asked me some questions, and I still didn't really believe him. And so then he was like, yeah, we're going to tour for a year, and we're going to play in all these countries. And I was like, is this for real? So then I went to Tower Records Tokyo, which was one of the biggest record stores in the world, maybe the biggest, honestly. It was like 5 floors and this huge thing. And so I went down there, and they had a big section of international music from all over the place. And I found Chinese music, and I found Jackie Chung, and he had like 50 albums or something. And I was like, okay, okay,
he's a big
something,
deal.
He's a big deal. So I got a few of them so I could check it out, and then I took it a little more seriously. But still, even then, this is actually how I realized in retrospect how I managed to get this gig, because I did have a lot of gigs then, and I was very busy, and so I was kind of a hard negotiator with them. They were like, we want you to come do this. And I was like, I don't know, really, you're going to have to pay me some in advance. And, and so the more I was like that, they thought, wow, this guy's serious. So,
Okay, so before we go on to the tour, I just want to know, so you've been into a lot of Asian countries.
Yes.
Is there a starking difference between the Asian pop sound at that time, not now, and the Western pop sound?
That's an interesting question. Really how I think of it is more like, by that time, I mean, it depends how far back you go.
Right.
If you go back another 20, 30 years before that, there definitely was,
Yeah.
But by that time, it was more like there was an international pop sound. I wouldn't say it's an American pop sound, actually, but kind of a sound of pretty songs about love and piano chords, and simple pop beats. And I mean, for example, I used to work with one record producer over there, and we would do these sessions where we would get together with a couple other musicians, and we would go through these demo tapes from other countries.
Right.
And it was part of Universal Music then. And so Universal Music, they have branches all over the world. So how they were doing it was, some songwriter would put together a demo of their songs, and then they would submit into this network of Universal Music people. And so we would audition things from all over the place. You know, we would listen to ones from, I remember one day we listened to songs from Italy and Indonesia and somewhere else, you know, and the style of the singing was quite different.
Right.
And the style of the language also leads it to be somewhat different.
Yeah.
Like Cantonese is very syllabic, so a lot of the lyrics tend to sound like da 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 da. You know, they have to enunciate all these syllables, whereas in Italian they might stretch out one word.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how I thought of it then. It wasn't so much of a Asian style by the 90s, at least not in what I was doing.
Right.
If you focus in on it really tiny, you could say, yeah, these little characteristics are somewhat, but it was more of an international pop style.
Yeah. Okay, so your first tour with Jackie Chung was 1995.
Yes.
So that went on for a year. After that, you went to China. You stayed there?
So I decided, after that year tour, it was like mid-95 to mid-96, then I had to decide, am I going to go back to Japan, or am I going to go back to America, or am I going to stay here? And it seemed like there would be enough work if I stayed there, and I was having a great time. I really loved Hong Kong, and so I decided to stay on. And then about that time, one of the guys who was playing on this tour became the band leader for Andy Lau.
Oh, yeah.
And then I ended up also playing for Andy Lau on many tours. So
I
was pretty much on tour perpetually for 5 years, just about.
Oh, wow. So what's the most difficult thing about going on a tour?
It's just like anybody going on tour for anything, you know, if you're away from home a lot. And it also makes it hard to work on any of your own projects. That was probably the most frustrating thing, actually, because I make my own music. My music isn't pop music.
Right.
And I'm into ambient music and jazz and electronic music. And so when I was always on tour, it was just, eventually I stopped because I was just very frustrated that I could never work on my own things.
Right.
When you're putting so much of yourself into somebody else's music, it kind of is, there's not much left.
Yeah, but was it financially rewarding?
Yeah, it was a great job. I mean, yeah, we were getting well paid back then.
And then everything is paid for? Food?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we were touring first class back then. We were staying in 5-star hotels.
Well, they're two of the biggest.
I know. I mean, we were flying everywhere. Like, we were touring at the top level for sure.
Do you see yourself? Can you still do it now?
I could still do it now, but yeah, totally, I could still do it now.
Okay, all right. So, well, you said.
I mean, some of my friends from back then are still doing it now.
Yeah, I know. You said that you're still in touch with them.
Yes.
And okay, this is surprising and very interesting for me because you said that many of the musicians that you were playing with or met were actually Filipinos.
Yes.
In Hong Kong. How do you think they ended up there? I mean, we're a country that ships our people all over the world, so that's not really.
They were expatriates.
Yeah, but it was just, and also we're a country that loves music. So, but it's just so interesting that in such this world that you were navigating at that time, it was such a big deal, and many of the people that you were meeting were actually Filipinos, and you had the theory on why that is.
Yes, right. I was going to say something about that. Well, it had been because of the American military being in the Philippines after the war. There were many Filipinos who had learned to play American music, rock music and pop music, and they would play. I actually played with a guy who used to play at military clubs during Vietnam. He was an older guy that played drums, and he would tell me stories about this actually. And so many of them learned to play, and they learned to play pretty well, and then there ended up being more gigs around Asia after the war at bars and hotels, and it got to be, there were Filipino musicians all around the area, all around different Asian countries. It was pretty much known that Filipinos are the best musicians. And so then, as Hong Kong developed as a pop music industry in the 80s and 90s really, some of the best of those musicians who already might have been playing in hotels or whatever, they eventually became the pop musicians, like the studio musicians and the touring musicians. And we're not talking large numbers of people. There were only a few dozen really good studio musicians in Hong Kong back then. I was one, and a good chunk of them were Filipinos.
Okay.
There was actually, in fact, the best bass player in Hong Kong was a Filipino guy. Sorry, there's a mosquito buzzing around him. And I later found out the reason that I was able to go on this tour was that he had had a fight with the band leader. And so, because that band leader was kind of a jerk, and so he had had enough of him. Yeah. Rightfully so, as I later found out. But anyway, then that band leader thought, I'm going to show these guys, I'm going to get somebody from outside their whole scene.
Yeah. Okay, so you have obviously a lot of experience working with Asians, and you also have a lot of experience working with Western pop artists or musicians. Is there any difference? Do you see any cultural difference between the two?
It's really more like there's a lot of individual difference between people, you know. I wouldn't really generalize it. That's not how I think about it, I guess I would say.
Yeah. All right, so you have a new album, and it is described as, reading how it was described, and it says a live dialogue between you and your bass.
Yes.
I don't know what that means. Can you explain?
Yes, well, besides being a bass player, I've also been a computer music producer for a long time, and starting when I was in Hong Kong, actually. And I have done a lot of work where I've designed effects setups or processing or something for other people often, sometimes for people working in Hollywood, for example. Okay. So in recent years, I played with a very famous ambient musician named John Hassel. I played with him from 2014 to 2020, and he died during the pandemic. But anyway, I designed his rig, which affected his instruments, and now I'm using that rig with my bass. Okay. So the reason I called that a live dialogue is that I have a lot of things happening in the computer. When I play one note, it goes in and splits apart, and different things happen, and it comes back to me. So it's not just the notes I'm playing at any one time. It's kind of a conversation with the notes coming back and echoing and looping.
Right. But that's intentional. Like everything that happens to one note that you send out, you intentionally split it apart and okay.
Yeah, yes, but it's kind of a semi-intuitive process because a setup like that is very complicated, and you don't really know exactly what's going to happen at any moment. And then depending on what does happen, you have to go with that, and it's kind of like making a sculpture. You have to, You see what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. How do you start out writing music? Is it by inspiration, or do you just play and if something interesting comes up?
There's so many ways to start writing music. The music for that album was all improvised on the bass. I didn't plan any of it in advance, and I'm not sure how I could really because of how my rig works, but you know, some people write music in their heads, some people write music on the piano, a lot of people write music in the computer. Depends on what kind of music.
Right. I know this is going to sound weird, but why bass? Why not a lead guitar?
When you think about having a career in music, bass is actually the best.
Well, I've heard my father say that before. He was like, because he's also, he's actually pretty good guitarist. And he said that if you actually wanted a career, the best way to go is to become a bassist. Hi there.
Summer's going to join the interview.
No, that's fine. Because he said that it really is the heart of a band. Like if the bassist actually screws up, you're screwed.
Yes, that is true. But more than that, that is totally true. But more than that, there's a lot of reasons. Every kind of music needs bass, first of all. I like playing a lot of kinds of music. That's how I ended up in Asia playing Asian pop music. But I've played in bands playing like Cuban salsa, and when I was in Hong Kong, I played with a soul jazz trio with two older African American guys. Very often, we played every week or two. And so bass is great for that because you can kind of travel into different realms. But also the most important reason is not as many good musicians end up playing bass. So when you get to the point of being a professional, everybody needs a bass player, and there aren't enough bass players to go around. That's pretty much how it is. And there's plenty of guitar players, and there's plenty of singers.
But is it true that it's easy to become an average bassist, but very hard to become a great bassist?
I mean, it depends on the kind of music. It's not easy to become a jazz bassist.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So you were also you you are constantly hired to rework Western pop artists, the songs and music of Western pop artists like Nelly Furtado?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So I went to the University of Hong Kong, and I was a graduate student there for a couple of years. And at the same time, I got very involved in DJing and electronic music. And I started making music with computers. And I started a band over there with a British DJ, the two of us. And it was called Digital Cut Up Lounge.
Okay.
And so we specialized in mixing things together and sampling things. That's what our music was all about. And so then I started working with a guy who was what was his exact job? I'm trying to remember. He was a higher up at Universal Music Asia.
Okay.
And he was always trying to come up with new ideas for new projects that Universal could do, and he had access to copyrights all over the world. So he heard something that I did where I mixed some Indian music into something. And so then he contacted me and he said, I have, these opportunities. We could take artists from different countries and mix them with artists from other countries and different styles of music. And what do you think about doing this? And I thought that sounded really interesting. So I started working with him, and it was because of him that I did that gig. So he wanted to take Nelly Furtado and combine it. At that time, I was like 99, 2000. There was a lot of drum and bass music mixed with Indian classical music that was quite popular. There were artists like Talvin Singh was probably the most popular one then. And so Hans Ebert was my contact there. He wanted to do something like that with Nelly Furtado.
Right.
And so I did. And he wanted to mix it together actually with an Indian star named Asha Bhonsle. I don't know if you've ever heard of her. She's like the queen of Bollywood music, essentially. Okay. From a little bit older generation. So he got me the master tapes, and I combined them together and made this thing, and Nelly loved it.
Okay. So let's shift a little bit in music production in general. A lot of my viewers are actually really curious about like the processes and everything. So first question, a music producer, what do you really do, if you can describe it in layman's term, and how much power do you have over the song?
How much power do you have over the song?
The song, yeah.
What do you mean by that last part?
Like, so there's the songwriter. I'm assuming they're the ones that are doing the instruments or the beats or the melodies and the lyrics. So what do you do, basically?
I would say the easiest way to think of it is the producer of a film.
Okay.
They're responsible for making the music.
Okay.
Period.
Okay.
However that needs to be done. These days, most of the time, it's somebody with a computer putting all the music together inside the computer, and a lot of times that is the only role. That person does everything. They play the keyboard or the chords or whatever,
Yeah.
It depends on the kind of music too, though, obviously. If you're talking about dubstep music, then it's all made in the computer. If you're talking about piano-driven ballads, then a lot of people are going to write those on the piano first and then record it,
Right.
So
do you say this, is it under the producer's responsibility or privilege or power to say, maybe we should put a saxophone here, put a choir?
Oh, that all depends who's paying the bills.
Okay.
If it's a producer in the sense that it's their project and they're taking responsibility and hiring everyone, then they can decide whatever they want. But if it's a producer that's been hired by an artist to produce their music, then the artist can decide.
Oh, okay. So it's not always a producer that says this is a done song.
It depends on who's in charge.
Right.
Of the project.
All right. Next, what is the difference between a sound engineer and the producer?
When we say engineer, typically we're talking about somebody who's just technically operating the equipment. That does get into some artistic areas, like how to make the voice sound the best. That's kind of subjective, but it's still kind of as much of a science as it is an art.
Yeah.
Being a producer, you're taking responsibility for making the whole thing happen.
Yeah.
You could be the producer and just hire the engineer to do all the technical parts, and your job would just be like, oh, I want that to be louder and this to be quieter. But these days, because of economics, but also because of creative control, it's more common that the producer is the one that just does everything, you know, and then you have total control over every aspect of it.
But one trend I'm also seeing is that there are more and more producers per song now. It used to be just one producer.
You mean in like big pop songs?
Yeah. There's like 17 people as a producer. I'm like, who's calling the shots?
Yeah, I mean, in those, I know what you're talking about. In those cases, I feel like, you know, 17 people didn't write a song. Like that's just a legal thing where it's like who gets a piece of the pie of this project, and because if you get your name on the song, then you get a percentage of it in, you know, forever.
Right.
As opposed to just being paid to work on it or something.
Yeah. So there was an issue, I think several years ago, and I think it's still ongoing. A lot of songwriters are complaining that many of these pop stars actually did not participate in writing the music, but they get credits as a songwriter. Are you aware of that? Why that even happens?
I mean, again, it's just a question of, it doesn't really matter who wrote the song. What matters is who's going to get paid for having done the song.
Right.
You know, I mean, if you have I don't think it's a question of fairness, really. Like, if you have, to use the easiest example, if you have a big pop star like Taylor Swift, and somebody writes a song for her, assume it's a really good song. But still, the reason people are going to listen to it first is because Taylor Swift recorded it, not because of the song itself initially, at least. So, should the songwriter have got all the credit? You know, that's kind of how it works. Taylor Swift has got 1,000 songs she could pick to sing. You know, shouldn't she get some of it? I mean, it gets thorny, but but that's the thinking. It's not about, you know, who wrote it necessarily.
Yeah. Do you think that's fair? I mean, as a songwriter yourself.
I don't think it's necessarily fair or unfair, you know? It depends on the situation.
Okay. So when it comes to making a singer sing a certain way, is that a producer's job? A sound engineer's job?
Well, let me just, typically today how it would work is you've got one person producing the session, and then you bring in a singer. So the producer then is responsible for physically, technically recording it and making sure it sounds good. But also, you know, a lot of recording, a singer especially, but any musician, a lot of it's psychological too, you know. You got to make sure the person feels comfortable and they're able to express themselves. And especially for a singer, if they're tense, you know, it creeps into their voice very easily. So it's very, very important to make sure everything is, you know, relaxed and easy. And, but then what I was going to say is with especially, you know, big budget pop music these days, there's a lot of post-processing that happens on the voice. And this is something actually that I've been studying myself in the last year or two. I have a teacher that works at our school who has done vocal processing for Timbaland and Katy Perry, and so I was taking lessons from him. And so after so typically this is how they would do it. You would record multiple times, you know, and then the vocal editor, this is called comping, vocal comping. You listen to all the takes, and for each little bit, each word or group of words, you find, oh, this was the best version of these 3 words, you know, and then you go through and find all of them. And then you paste together like all the best ones and make sure it sounds like they all go together. And then you're still like adjusting the timing very slightly. Like if that word, that's what I was studying with this teacher. If you bring that first word just a little bit ahead, oh, suddenly it all sounds better. It's amazing. And then there's also the tuning, the auto-tuning, make sure everything's in tune. So when you hear, and then there's the doubling of the voices. You know, you hear like in the chorus, there's going to be multiple copies of the voice or background parts or harmonies. So there's a lot to the vocal production part. That's a whole art itself.
Okay.
Because you want it to sound as good as possible.
Okay.
So you could just sit down and play the guitar and sing the song right in. There's nothing stopping you. But most people today aren't capable of doing that and just nailing one take so great that everyone's going to think that that was the one. Like, I guarantee you most people can't do that. Most people could never do that, honestly. We're talking about only like Aretha Franklin or somebody like that, you know.
Probably Whitney during her.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's great people like that. I was just hearing a video clip from '60s jazz singer that I can't remember who it was now, but she was saying the music was all ruined after they started doing the vocal editing and everything, you know, because before that you had to just nail it.
Yeah. Do you think so?
I mean, yeah, I do think so. My own experience working with it, I love the idea that you're saying, and I love the way I record people is by trying to get them to just do long, improvisational, intuitive takes. But then you do go back and edit it, and what you find is always like, well, this part is better than that part, and this sounds better than that, and I want people to hear the good parts. You know, quite simply. I mean, you can't. And the more you get into that, the more it's kind of inescapable, and that's what we're all doing in music these days.
So, a little bit on the business side of music. Billboard Hot 100 right now is dominated by country music for several months now. Do you think we're going back to the old times? Because country is really America's music. That's like the...
I mean, this is one thing that I expect to happen with AI. It will get easier to copy sounds or to make your version of what's on the radio or whatever. So I'm not sure about this, but I could see it happening that people actually playing instruments and singing becomes more valued, because it'll be making electronic sounds will just become easier and easier to where anybody can do it. And so, but it's still going to be hard to play the guitar and sing always.
Right,
you know?
yeah.
I mean, we already have seen that happen to a degree with the boom over the years in festivals and touring and all that. People still really treasure more than ever, actually, to go see somebody live.
Yeah.
And I could see that becoming even more. So that could be a trend. What you said could be the first.
Do you agree with the way music is being pushed to the public? Because it's all streaming now, and there's so many musicians complaining about getting very little royalties from streaming.
I mean, I do have a somewhat different take on that than most musicians, because the thing that, yes, it's true, streaming doesn't pay very much.
Okay.
But there's a lot of factors involved there. I think the biggest one is that because of what I was just saying, it's easier to make music than ever before. There's 500 times more people making albums than there were in the 1980s. Mm-hmm. So there's just way more music. If we had Spotify now, but there were only a handful, if there were only as many people making albums as there were in the 70s, they'd be making a lot more money. True. Even if at current rates, because there just weren't many albums. The reason there weren't many albums is because it was hard to make albums. It was expensive, and you had to, rent a studio and all those things.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of it is just supply and demand. Mm-hmm. Also with the streaming, from a listener perspective, it's great. I want to listen to whatever I want to listen to whenever I want to listen to it, and so does everyone else. You know, that's what we all want. And it's been kind of proven that we don't want to pay that much for it. So
we pay for coffee, but not for music.
The way it also comes back to, these platforms have to compete with each other.
True.
So if Spotify charged their listeners $100 a month, they could pay out a lot more money to the artists, but then everyone would quit them. Mm-hmm. So the only way I could see that the payments could ever be increased would be by some legal measures, honestly. You'd have to just require that all streaming platforms must pay at least some minimum rate to people, because otherwise it's just a race to the bottom,
Right, yeah. One of the unique strategies of K-pop is to sell the artist.
To sell the artist?
Yeah, so they develop the fan loyalty.
Right.
So that no matter what the band sells, fans are just going to buy.
Right.
Then, isn't that not about music anymore?
I mean, people have always been doing that, haven't they?
Okay.
I don't feel like that's anything new. Like, pop stars have been promoted to the public ever since there have been records.
I get you.
Essentially,
I get you, yeah.
And they tried to, think about like the early Hollywood stars. as well, not only musicians. You know, they tried to build them up into celebrities, and so people would love them, and then they would go to every movie that they. I guess now we have a lot more media, and there's a lot more ways to do it, so it's kind of more intense.
Yeah. I really would love to see you and Jackie come together again. I would love to see you go back to Asia.
That would be wild.
Probably get into K-pop a little bit. It would be. It's going to be interesting for you. It's a whole new different ball game there. It's really, and they have admitted it themselves. They said it's not just about music anymore. If you talk about K-pop, it's the entire culture. It's not about just music.
I mean, I could add one more thing there. I feel like as music has become easier to make and record, it makes it so it's part of a bigger thing. It's part of a bigger statement you're making.
Right,
you know,
yeah.
it's not as impressive to just write some songs now.
Yeah.
You know, you have to have the whole, even for, it doesn't only apply to K-pop. You know, if you want to be a DJ producer in America, you need to have your visual image and your branding and your marketing strategy. You know, otherwise you're going to go nowhere.
That's a good lead-in for your wife's interview.
That's true. That's true. All right, perfect.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's fun talking about this stuff.
Thank you so much. It was so much fun.
Yeah.